Long before the United States existed, the North American continent was home to ancient landscapes, roaming wildlife, and diverse peoples. Archaeologists believe the first humans arrived during the last ice age, crossing a land bridge called Beringia, which once connected Siberia to Alaska. As temperatures rose and glaciers melted, the land bridge disappeared beneath the rising seas, trapping the early migrants on the continent. Over thousands of years, these groups spread across forests, deserts, and grasslands, forming hundreds of unique cultures. These early societies were deeply shaped by nature. The vast rivers inspired trade networks, the mountains shaped borders, and the seasons influenced belief systems. In the Mississippi Valley, an advanced civilization emerged, now known as the Mississippian culture. They built large earth mounds, ceremonial platforms, and thriving towns such as Cahokia, a city once larger than medieval London. To the southwest, the Pueblo peoples engineered impressive multi-story stone structures, connected by roads and trade. Meanwhile, the forests of the northeast became home to the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, Confederacy, a powerful democratic alliance created to maintain peace among its nations. Their political system impressed later European visitors. Far to the north, Norse explorers made brief contact with North America around the 11th century. Leif Erikson, blown off course while sailing from Greenland, landed on present-day Newfoundland, where his crew established a settlement called Vinland. The colony, however, did not last. Harsh winters, limited resources, and conflict forced the settlers to abandon it. These early eras reveal a continent full of life, innovation, and cultural depth long before any European power imagined a new world. During the 15th century, Europe's merchants controlled wealthy trade routes stretching to India and China. Spices, silk, and precious metals brought immense profit, but when the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople in 1453, overland routes to Asia became dangerous and costly. European kingdoms now sought new ways to reach the East. Into this climate stepped Christopher Columbus, an ambitious navigator who believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. Supported by Queen Isabella of Castile, Columbus departed in 1492 with the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. Instead of Asia, he landed in the Caribbean, unknowingly opening the door to European expansion into the Americas. Columbus made 4 voyages and was appointed governor of Hispaniola, but he quickly gained a reputation for brutality. His administration enslaved indigenous populations, imposed harsh punishments, and drove communities to collapse. Eventually, he was arrested and sent back to Spain in chains. Yet it was disease, not Columbus's violence alone, that devastated native populations. Europeans carried illnesses such as smallpox and measles, to which the indigenous people had no immunity. Historians estimate that up to 90% of the native population in some regions perished within a century. Meanwhile, explorers and mapmakers began calling the discovered lands the New World. Spanish fleets conquered riches in South America, defeating the Aztec and Inca empires. Inspired by these successes, other European powers, France, the Netherlands, and England, also turned their eyes westward. They hoped for trade, territory, and influence. These early encounters reshaped the destiny of 2 worlds, one ancient, one ambitious, setting the stage for centuries of conflict, colonization, and transformation. By the mid-17th century, North America had become a battleground of competing empires and native alliances. European ships now sailed regularly between Africa, the Caribbean, and America, forming the triangular trade. Manufactured goods were shipped to Africa, enslaved Africans were transported under brutal conditions to plantations in the New World, and valuable crops such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton returned to Europe. This system enriched European powers while fueling unimaginable human suffering. Meanwhile, territorial competition escalated. The French claimed a vast inland empire stretching from Canada down the Mississippi River, while the English colonies grew rapidly along the Atlantic coast. Although the English held less land, their population was booming, giving them greater economic and military strength. The Dutch, once powerful in the region, lost New Netherland to England during the Second Anglo-Dutch War, and the city of New Amsterdam was renamed New York. The struggle for control intensified as the Iroquois Confederacy, backed by English traders, continued fighting for dominance of the fur trade. French forces retaliated by attacking Iroquois villages and fortifications. These conflicts weakened many indigenous nations, forcing them to choose sides in a world where European guns increasingly shaped political realities. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1754 when France and Britain clashed over the Ohio River Valley, a fertile region claimed by both empires. France began constructing fortified posts, alarming the British. Skirmishes quickly expanded into the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the larger 7 Years' War that engulfed Europe, Asia, and Africa. After years of fighting, Britain emerged victorious. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, granted Britain control over almost all French territory east of the Mississippi River. Yet victory came at a steep price. The British Empire was left with enormous war debts. Determined T. Following Britain's victory in the 7 Years' War, the empire found itself burdened with enormous debt. British leaders believed the American colonies, who had benefited from British protection, should help pay the cost. But the colonists felt differently. Most believed they had been loyal subjects who fought bravely in the war, and they resented being taxed without having any political voice in London. The first major tax, the Sugar Act, placed duties on imported goods. Soon after came the Stamp Act, which required all newspapers, legal documents, and printed materials to use special taxed paper. Colonists reacted with anger and organized widespread boycotts of British products. Merchants feared financial ruin, and protests erupted across the colonies under the slogan, "No taxation without representation." British authorities, surprised by the intensity of the backlash, repealed the Stamp Act, but quickly introduced new taxes on items such as lead, glass, paint, and tea. These were everyday necessities, and resentment deepened. To enforce order, Britain sent more soldiers to major colonial cities, especially Boston, where anger was boiling. On March 5, 1770, tensions exploded. Colonists confronted British soldiers outside the custom house, hurling insults, snowballs, and stones. Confused and panicked, the soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 5 people. This tragic event became known as the Boston Massacre, fueling anti-British sentiment. 3 years later, protest took a dramatic turn. A group of patriots known as the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped entire shipments of tea into Boston Harbor. The act, soon called the Boston Tea Party, enraged the British government. In response, Parliament issued the Intolerable Acts, shutting down Boston's port and stripping Massachusetts of self-governance. Rather than weakening the colonies, these harsh measures united them. Leaders from across the continent agreed. The British response to colonial resistance only intensified the crisis. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress, a historic assembly aimed at defending colonial rights. They demanded that Britain repeal the Intolerable Acts and restore self-government in Massachusetts. London, instead of compromising, issued even stricter measures and increased its military presence in America. Tension reached a breaking point in early 1775. The British commander in Boston, General Thomas Gage, received orders to disarm colonial militias and arrest suspected rebel leaders hiding in the countryside. On the night of April 18, 1775, British troops quietly marched toward Concord to seize hidden weapons. But colonial scouts spotted their movement. Patriot writer Paul Revere raced through the night, warning towns along the route that the British are coming. The message spread rapidly, and local militias, known as Minutemen for their ability to mobilize instantly, rushed to defend their communities. At dawn on April 19, the British encountered a small group of Minutemen on the Lexington Green. No one knows who fired the first shot, but that single gunshot, later called the shot heard around the world, triggered the American Revolution. The British easily scattered the militia at Lexington, but when they reached Concord, the colonists had regrouped. Fierce fighting erupted at the North Bridge, forcing the British to retreat. The journey back to Boston became a nightmare. Thousands of armed colonists lined the roads, firing from behind trees, fences, and stone walls. By the time British troops reached the safety of Boston, they had suffered heavy casualties. The city was soon surrounded by colonial forces, beginning the siege of Boston. A month later, in May 1775, representatives reconvened as the Second Continental Congress. Recognizing that open war had begun, they organized the militias into the Continental Army and, as the newly formed Continental Army surrounded Boston, both sides prepared for a long struggle. British reinforcements soon arrived under General William Howe, determined to break the colonial blockade.
In June 1775, colonial forces occupied Breed's Hill overlooking the city.
The British launched a massive assault, resulting in the fierce Battle of Bunker Hill. Though the British technically won by capturing the position, their victory came at a shocking cost, more than 1,000 casualties. The colonists, despite running out of ammunition, had proven they could stand against one of the world's strongest armies.
Morale soared throughout the colonies. General George Washington arrived shortly after to take command.
He reorganized the troops, tightened discipline, and waited for heavy artillery that was being transported from captured forts in upstate New York. Through the harsh winter, both sides endured hunger, cold, and uncertainty.
By March 1776, the long-awaited cannons finally reached Boston.
Washington positioned them on Dorchester Heights, giving the colonists a commanding view of the harbor.
The British suddenly found themselves exposed to devastating bombardment. Realizing their position was impossible to defend, they chose to evacuate the city. After nearly a year, Boston was free.
Meanwhile, political thought was shifting rapidly. Many colonists who once sought reconciliation now believed separation from Britain was the only path forward. Pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense argued powerfully that a distant monarchy had no right to rule a continent.
Encouraged by this changing mood, the Second Continental Congress appointed Thomas Jefferson to draft a formal declaration.
After debate and revision, the final text was approved on July 4, 1776, announcing that the colonies were now the United States of America, a new nation seeking its rightful place in the world. But independence on paper was only the beginning.
Britain had no intention of.
As winter winds pressed over the region, the conflict entered a quieter yet far more dangerous phase. Armies were no longer clashing openly. Instead, both sides focused on gathering intelligence, strengthening alliances, and mapping weaknesses. This was the moment when small decisions began shaping the eventual fate of empires.
The commanders understood that a single miscalculation could reverse every gain achieved so far.
Within the capital, political tensions were rising like a storm. Influential advisors argued over strategy. Some insisted on pushing the war forward with full force, while others urged caution, warning that the enemy's silence was a sign of hidden plans rather than surrender.
Documents retrieved from intercepted messengers confirmed that rival states were secretly supplying weapons and funds to the opposition.
This discovery shocked the court, proving that the conflict was no longer between two sides, it had become a regional power struggle. Meanwhile, on the front lines, ordinary soldiers lived through exhausting routines. Days were spent repairing fortifications, digging deeper trenches, and training for unexpected night raids.
Scouts reported unusual movements in forested areas and along mountain passes.
The enemy was luring them into a false sense of calm, preparing a surprise that could shift the course of the war. Yet the commanders refused to be caught off guard. They reorganized their units, rotated troops to maintain strength, and deployed their sharpest observers to every vulnerable sector. Amid all this tension, a secret meeting took place between trusted generals and the crown's closest advisors. A new strategy was proposed, one that relied not on brute force but on precision. Instead of chasing decisive battles, they would target the enemy's communication lines, supply routes, and hidden alliances.
It was a bold plan that could either cripple the opposition or backfire dramatically.
This was the point where the war subtly began to chaw.
As the new strategy took shape, an unexpected development shook the foundation of the ruling council.
A trusted official, long considered loyal, was caught exchanging coded messages with foreign agents. His arrest sent ripples of fear across the capital.
If one traitor had slipped through unnoticed, how many more might be hidden within the system?
The revelation forced the leadership to confront an uncomfortable truth. The enemy was not only outside, it had already infiltrated their inner circles. Interrogations revealed the depth of the conspiracy.
Key resources were being misdirected, military plans leaked, and negotiations sabotaged from within.
The betrayal explains several earlier failures that had been dismissed as coincidence. Now, with the truth exposed, the commanders realized that the war's most dangerous battles were not fought on open fields but in shadows and secret chambers. In response, the council formed a covert task force made up of trusted veterans known for their discipline and silence.
Their mission was simple yet perilous: identify the remaining traitors, track the flow of secret funds, and dismantle the enemy's hidden network piece by piece.
Operating mostly at night, the task force infiltrated merchant guilds, intercepted private letters, and followed suspicious figures through crowded marketplaces. Slowly, they uncovered a web of bribery and deception stretching across the region. Meanwhile, in the military camps, rumors of betrayal spread rapidly. Soldiers grew anxious, wondering whom they could trust. Some feared that their efforts on the battlefield were being sabotaged, while others became determined to fight harder, believing that loyalty was now more important than ever. The morale of the army teetered between unity and paranoia. But from this chaos emerged a crucial discovery, evidence of an impending enemy offensive. Hidden within confiscated letters was a coded reference to a coordinated attack on 3 fronts. The leadership now. The discovery of the planned 3-front attack sent shockwaves through the council, but there was no time for panic. Every commander, advisor, and strategist was summoned to an emergency assembly. Maps were rolled open, scouts' reports laid out in piles, and messengers rushed in and out of the hall like a constant stream. The leadership knew that if they misread even a single detail, the enemy's assault could break their defenses in one devastating sweep. To counter this threat, they devised a defensive formation unlike any used before. Instead of concentrating forces in predictable strongholds, the army was divided into flexible, mobile units capable of rapid response. These units were positioned across valleys, forest edges, and fortified ridges. Their purpose was simple: delay the enemy, confuse them, then strike where they least expected. But as preparations intensified, signs of an unusual silence emerged. Enemy camps, once active with patrols and signal fires, now appeared eerily still. Scouts reported abandoned watchposts, empty roads, and quiet border towns. Some commanders believed the enemy was retreating or reconsidering its plans, others sensed something far more dangerous: an unseen approach disguised by deliberate silence. Meanwhile, the civilian population felt the tension like a tightening rope. Markets closed earlier, families gathered supplies, and rumors spread faster than official announcements. Priests offered nightly prayers, elders warned of a battle that could reshape the land, and young men volunteered for militia units, determined not to be caught helpless if the enemy broke through. Inside the capital, the covert task force continued dissecting intercepted messages. In one partially burnt letter, they found a chilling line: "When their eyes turn west, strike from the heart." The phrase hinted at a hidden fourth move, an infiltration plan deep inside the capital itself. The commanders now faced a terrible truth: the enemy attack while. The revelation of a possible fourth strike inside the capital created a new wave of urgency. The council immediately ordered the city's gates to be reinforced, patrols doubled, and communication checkpoints established. Yet everyone knew that if infiltrators were already inside, walls and gates would offer little protection. What mattered now was uncovering their identities before the attack began. The covert task force worked relentlessly, piecing together clues from coded letters, suspicious travel patterns, and merchant accounts. One name kept appearing in their investigations: a wealthy trader who had recently risen to prominence, gaining influence with surprising speed. He hosted lavish feasts, funded public works, and won the trust of many officials. But behind his generosity lay a carefully hidden motive: he was the central link connecting foreign agents to local dissidents. While the task force prepared a quiet operation to corner him, the army on the front lines braced for the main assault. Soldiers sharpened weapons, checked armor, and studied the new defensive strategies. Officers drilled their units day and night, knowing that the upcoming battle would test every tactic they had crafted. The once divided regiments now trained with shared purpose. Betrayal had pushed them to realize the cost of disunity. Tension thickened as midnight approached. In the capital, the task force moved silently toward the traitor's estate. But the moment they entered the courtyard, they sensed something was wrong. The building was too quiet, too still. Inside, they found empty rooms and a single parchment left on a table. It read, "You are already too late." At the same time, far from the city, watchtowers along the eastern ridge lit up with alarm fires. The enemy armies had begun their advance on 2 fronts, faster and more organized than expected. And deep within the capital's crowded market district, 3 figures blended into the evening crowd, carrying sealed containers. The revelation of a possible fourth strike inside the capital created a new wave of urgency. The council immediately ordered the city's gates to be reinforced, patrols doubled, and communication checkpoints established.
Yet everyone knew that if infiltrators were already inside, walls and gates would offer little protection.
What mattered now was uncovering their identities before the attack began.
The covert task force worked relentlessly, piecing together clues from coded letters, suspicious travel patterns, and merchant accounts.
One name kept appearing in their investigations: a wealthy trader who had recently risen to prominence, gaining influence with surprising speed. He hosted lavish feasts, funded public works, and won the trust of many officials.
But behind his generosity lay a carefully hidden motive: he was the central link connecting foreign agents to local dissidents.
While the task force prepared a quiet operation to corner him, the army on the front lines braced for the main assault. Soldiers sharpened weapons, checked armor, and studied the new defensive strategies. Officers drilled their units day and night, knowing that the upcoming battle would test every tactic they had crafted. The once divided regiments now trained with shared purpose. Betrayal had pushed them to realize the cost of disunity.
Tension thickened as midnight approached. In the capital, the task force moved silently toward the trader's estate. But the moment they entered the courtyard, they sensed something was wrong.
The building was too quiet, too still.
Inside, they found empty rooms and a single parchment left on a table. It read, "You are already too late."
At the same time, far from the city, watchtowers along the eastern ridge lit up with alarm fires. The enemy armies had begun their advance on two fronts, faster and more organized than expected. And deep within the capital's crowded market district, three figures blended into the evening crowd, carrying sealed containers. The moment the enemy's advance began, the entire region seemed to awaken with a violent jolt.
Signal drums thundered across the front lines, and towers flashed urgent fire codes through the night.
But while the outer defenses scrambled into formation, the true danger crept silently within the capital's heart.
The three infiltrators, hidden among the evening crowds, quietly moved toward their assigned targets, locations chosen not for destruction, but for maximum chaos. Their first destination was the central communication tower, the structure responsible for relaying military orders to distant outposts. If it fell, the entire defensive strategy would collapse. The infiltrators blended into a group of traveling merchants entering the tower's lower courtyard.
Inside their sealed containers were compact ignition devices, simple yet lethal enough to disable the signal mechanisms. Meanwhile, in the council hall, the task force rushed back with the traitor's ominous message.
Realizing the infiltration had already begun, the commander ordered immediate lockdown procedures.
But the city was vast, its streets crowded, and the attackers well disguised. Identifying them would be like searching for shadows in a storm. On the outskirts, the two enemy armies pushed hard against the defensive line. Their formations were tight, disciplined, and supported by siege engineers moving with unnerving precision. Yet the newly trained mobile units performed exactly as planned, striking fast, retreating before being encircled, and forcing the enemy to adjust repeatedly. It slowed the advance, but the soldiers knew it was only a matter of time before a breakthrough attempt would come. Back in the capital, a young watchman noticed something strange: a faint metallic ticking inside a merchant's abandoned stall near the communication tower. He opened the container and froze. The device was seconds away from activation. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and sprinted toward an empty alley.
The blast. The clash in the waterworks tunnels marked a turning point. The task force managed to overpower the first infiltrator after a brutal struggle that left two guards wounded. When they searched his belongings, they found a crude map showing the city's weakest pressure valves. If destroyed, the water supply would have collapsed within hours. The discovery confirmed the scale of the enemy's plan. They weren't trying to occupy the capital first, they were trying to paralyze it. But there was no time to celebrate. Two infiltrators were still loose.
Above ground, the capital buzzed with confusion. Bells rang warnings from every district, and lanterns lit up balconies as residents peered into the streets, uncertain of what danger lurked nearby. Patrols sprinted between the armory district, the granaries, and the council square. The commander knew that if the attackers reached the armory, the resulting explosion could level several neighborhoods and open a path for invading forces. At the same time, scouts on the eastern front reported something disturbing: the enemy troops had changed formation. Instead of pressing forward in waves, they moved in sharp, coordinated columns designed to pierce defenses like a spear. This shift meant one thing: the enemy was counting on a distraction from inside the capital.
If the infiltrators succeeded, the enemy would unleash their full assault at the exact moment the defenders were in chaos.
Back in the capital, the task force intercepted whispers from frightened shopkeepers who had seen a hooded figure heading toward the armory. Immediately, the commander dispatched a dozen elite guards to intercept. They moved swiftly through narrow alleys, lanterns cutting through the darkness. When they reached the district, they found the second infiltrator placing an ignition device beneath a stack of ammunition crates. A chase erupted through the labyrinth of storage rooms and courtyards. The infiltrator was fast, too fast to corner easily, but the second infiltrator's capture brought relief, but the most dangerous threat was still at large: the courier carrying a sealed scroll meant to ignite an internal uprising the moment the enemy breached the outer defenses.
One delivered message and the capital would fall from within. The task force identified him as their top priority.
Eyewitness accounts suggested he was moving toward Speaker's Square, a place where rival guilds and restless groups often gathered. If he reached it and spread the coded orders, chaos would erupt instantly. Slipping through the old quarters maze of alleys, the courier used the crowded streets to hide his movements. The captain of the task force, a skilled tracker, followed the faint trail with unwavering focus. A fleeting shadow racing across a rooftop confirmed he was close. The pursuit rose to the rooftops over slanted tiles, wooden planks, and narrow terraces. The courier moved quickly, knowing the high ground gave him the best chance to reach the square unnoticed. The distant noise of the gathering crowd grew louder with every step. At last, he reached a roof overlooking Speaker's Square. With urgency, he pulled out the sealed scroll and prepared to shout the coded phrase that would trigger unrest. Just as he opened his mouth, the captain lunged forward, tackling him at the roof's edge. The scroll slipped from the courier's grasp, spinning toward the ground until the captain caught it at the last moment. The courier was subdued. The message was secured. And the capital narrowly avoided tearing itself apart.